This is Amend and Progress, your go-to podcast from Vidori for all things promotional material review. Get ready for actionable insights, valuable perspectives, and best practices to elevate your workflow and team morale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amend and Progress, Vidori's podcast about the material review process. I'm your host, Annalise, and today we're going to be talking about usability, and more specifically, the importance of usability in compliance platforms. Joining me in the conversation today is Anne Swearingen, returning guest and CEO of Tangerines Consulting. Anne, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to see you again.
Delighted to have you as always. And, I was reflecting, you've been on the show, I don't know the exact count, but we've talked about team management, we've talked about goal setting, we've talked about department-specific reviews. We've covered a lot of ground on the podcast so far this year. And actually in a lot of those conversations, usability hasn't been maybe the focus of the conversation, but it's come up a couple of times. And I know from working with you in the past, you have maybe an affinity or have paid special attention to usability as a system owner in the past at life science organizations. And I'm curious, as we start the conversation today, where does that maybe affinity or special attention to usability come from? Why is this important, maybe to you or to organizations that you've worked in?
Well, multiple, it's an awesome topic, right? Usability. We all love things to be super easy to use. The more steps, I think, like IKEA's got pictures and that's all it is, right? And so it's like, if you do this, but sometimes there's 75 steps and sometimes there's 3. And when there's 75 steps, you can feel very overwhelmed just in day-to-day life. So when we go to work and we want to use a system that manages our content review, we're like point and click. We do this every day with shopping online and other things. So the fact that we can go ahead and look at something, oh, this is super intuitive. I can click here next, or I do this, or I get this big warning light when it's wrong or it can't advance. It kind of goes in with kind of our lives in general. And so it just kind of fits right in.
Yeah. It's almost an assumed thing at this point, especially considering all the types of systems we use today. But I think so often maybe at work, it's maybe one of the elements that doesn't get thought about as often. Why do you
Right.
think that is? Within or life science organizations, people buy systems all the time. Certainly we understand inherently the easier it is to use, the happier I'm going to be doing this, or the easier it's going to be to do my job. But it's maybe not the forefront of the selection criteria of systems. Why do you think that is?
So the folks that are picking the systems are the users, not the designers, right? And so they will come up with some things, but I think that with content review, because we're looking at it from a compliance standpoint, it's like we have to do it, right? And so we're looking at it more from, how does this meet the regulations? How does it stay in with our procedures? How does it stay in with the labeling requirements that we have? How does it integrate with other systems? And sometimes the people in some organizations who are making those decisions aren't the users. They're really software folks or IT folks that are like, oh yeah, well, these are the box it checks. And so it does, it fits, but they're not diving into that customer experience or the UX, the user experience that, Joe marketer or Susie marketer somewhere else that maybe English isn't their native language has to go through. They're not thinking about that, and so when you're selecting a system and being able to do this, that how can I do this in 6 clicks, 8 clicks, whatever it is, drag and drop, and be much more in tune. I think we all kind of want it to be easy. When systems change on us unexpectedly and they're forced on us, we're like, whoa, I want to go back to like Outlook Classic or something, right? I mean, we've all been there because we're like, well, I finally got used to it and it was easy,
Sure.
right? And now you're like, oh my goodness. So same thing with content review. And Vidori's system is so easy to use. It's point and click and drag and drop, and it uses all of those tools that we already embrace in multiple other systems today.
You started to creep in a little bit about the adoption of the software. If it's easier to use, then maybe this is going to be the barrier to entry is lower to me using this new system, especially if I've been using a different type of system or process in the past, and that's what I'm used to. Can you talk me through, from your perspective, the relationship between great usability and adoption of software and how those things are interlinked?
Yeah, that's a great topic. When you bring in a new system, and whether it's you're going from paper to electronic or changing electronic to electronic, it's change management. And there's lots of theories out there on that, but a lot of people will be upset to be like, oh, I don't want to do this. And they put up barriers. It's no different than sometimes when, something happens at home and you're like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Right. And we all have different tolerances. And it's really getting the message to the, what I like to call the WIIFM, WIIFM, what's in it for me,
Mm.
right? And kind of really targeting to say, hey, Annalise, we've got this new software system. I looked at your metrics or I looked at the data, and your group is spending like 4 hours a day doing content review. I've got a new system that, we want to bring you in early, and then go ahead and say, hey, I want you to be one of our champions because I know
Mhm.
you struggle with this, and I want you to see how easy it is to use. And if you're not finding it easy to use, then we have a problem, and that's important to us. And
Right.
so you need to have those champions as well that will help you with the adoption. So it's not just the software team or the implementation team that's pushing it, but you've got people that are really bought in, that are those quiet influencers, within the groups, to be able to say, hey, I'm on this like project team and we're putting in this new software system for our content review, and man, it's easy to use. And then, because positive news goes by, when something says it's easier to use, you're like, hey, sign me up. I mean, is that a magic weight loss pill or whatever? Like, I'll take it, right? Easy to
Sure.
use, right?
Yeah.
We've gotten to the point where we just don't like hard. And so to do that, it's getting the buy-in, but making sure that you're looking at it and that it meets as well the people that are going to be using it. And depending on the geography, you may have some geographies may be early adopters, some may be a bit later. There's cultural aspects that come in to this thing for usability as well. Different ways of communicating, different ways of training them up on the system. But the easier to use, then you start with, as we've talked before, metrics and numbers, going, hey, we've put through X number and it was like no time.
Mhm. You're creeping up on
I like to
using
do that, creep
metrics.
up on something.
No surprise, Anne is talking about metrics, right? And I think as we think about, we'll get to this a little bit later because I think it's sort of at the end of sort of what is the return on investment of something that's easy to use. And I think the metrics thing is definitely something I want to come back to. But before we get there, it's almost like, the relationship between user experience and adoption. So this is early on within a organization's relationship with a new vendor or new software. Let's move into content review specifically, or like the process in which
Mhm.
the software is facilitating. Where does user experience show up in terms of value adding to both individuals and teams, both from maybe just a day-to-day perspective, but I'm also curious to get your perspective on the compliance piece and how user experience can shepherd great compliance within an organization.
Well, day to day, we like doing tasks that are easy. So all of a sudden, if it becomes easier, you're like, yeah, heck, I can route this document through zim, 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 and boom, it's gone, right? And so day to day, having a system that's super easy to use is done. I mean, other systems are generating your emails for you with AI. Like, all right, cool. Easy to use, right? And so day to day, when individual contributors are doing their work or planning their work, or they're going to like they're either a submitter or a reviewer, they can easily go in, they can see very quickly on a dashboard what they have to do for the day. And with the ease of use of the system, they can go in and go, yep, I've got 4 things to do, boom, 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 done. as opposed to, oh, I have to go into this system that takes 4 things for me to log in. And then I have to point and click 17 times to finally get to a document. I have to download it into a whole thing, and then I have to re-upload it. I can't just do it in the system itself. Right. And so that aspect is huge. And so it takes time. We all kind of go, yeah, it's not so good. We're all our Debbie
Mhm.
Doubters when a system first comes up, until they kind of get through that initial week or month of, no, they really did sell me on this. It really is that easy to use. From a compliance standpoint, the Vidori system has the basic things that you need to be compliant. It's up to the institution or the organization to be really strict or really open with what they want to do. At the end of the day, we all agree that content review impacts our labeling, period. Right?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
levels of checks and balances you want is up to the institution. It's best practice to have medical, regulatory, legal, marketing, potentially, right? Look at stuff. But if the institution is small or the organization is small, the procedures may reflect that. They're like, you know what? 2 people can look at it, or just this one person, or something's happened offline. And so the procedures that an organization will put in should reflect their day-to-day practice. It shouldn't be an ideal, because all of a sudden, when you have that non-compliance, you're putting yourself at regulatory risk. So when you're bringing in the Vidori platform, it's so easy to say, yeah, here's how it is. And when you configure it, you're like, here it is.
Mhm.
It's like, we only need Annalise or somebody in medical to go ahead and do this, or these ones are only for legal, or whatever it is. Make it match, and then compliance is not an issue,
Mhm.
because there's not a chance to deviate from it.
There are
So that's
boundaries.
how I would, kind of recommend doing that.
Yeah, it sounds like, there's boundaries that people have to operate within, and there's actually no choice there. But it's also enforcing those SOPs no matter what. And there's built in, again, boundaries or questions or, whatever. You're basically creating, these are the confines under which we're operating. You don't have another option, right? And so by default, there's higher chance of compliance with the review process
Well,
overall.
your gas tank only takes so much stuff. And when it's low, you get a gas light. It forces you,
Hmm.
right? And you don't even need a procedure to say, when the gas light comes on, fill up your gas tank. And
Yes.
then it becomes kind of automatic, because it's just what's expected. And so
Hmm.
the merging of the procedures and then the system functionality and usability are super key to success.
Hmm. You talked a little bit about, and you talked about in terms of clicks, easier to use systems were, 3 clicks, 7 clicks, whatever. More complex systems, 14, 15. How does that get reflected within the sentiment of the teams? I'm trying to create sort of this maybe connection between how people feel about using a system and what impact that has on not only the teams and the organization, but the process itself. Can you connect some of these dots for me, please?
Yeah, it's a little softer. It's that intangible stuff, but it's in chat.
Hmm.
It's, hey, I just routed like 6 documents in 10 minutes. Seriously, you know
Yep.
what I mean? And they're like, hey, Anna, like, whether they're Zooming or talking to somebody in the cube next to them or whatever, but it's like, oh my gosh, have you tried this new system? Like, I did, what normally would have taken me 20 minutes, I did in like 5, or no, would have taken me 2 hours, I did in 5. And then it's this slow chatter that starts to get around and within the groups to say, yeah, because then that's when your Debbie Doubters start to go away, right? Because they keep hearing from you and from me and from Scott and from whoever that, yeah, no, I went in and I approved 14 pieces today and it took me 10 minutes. Done. You know, that's one way to do it. The other way sometimes is if your your IT team is super savvy to see how long people are in the systems, but that's not necessarily
Hmm.
100% correlated to, because you can have the system open and not be doing anything in there,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But it's intangible. And then what we did in some of my prior organizations was we sent out a survey to be able to say, hey, you know, what do you think about this? How do you feel? And asking about their feelings about it, right?
Mhm.
Because feelings are very subjective, but it's like, do you feel that the system is a lot easier to use? Not, and then you can maybe put a scale on it after, but you want to get a little bit of their like, what do you like about it? And sometimes just make that
Mhm.
open text instead of like bidding them into, I absolutely love these features.
Yep.
But I found that it was super easy to get more usability, more um folks going on that adoption journey through peer influence,
Hmm. The power of peers.
power peers.
Yep. And if you're happier with a system, inherently, you're going to use it more and within the confines that's been set up, right? I think there's some connection that maybe isn't always revealed until you've been using a system for a while in terms of this importance of the sentiment, not only in capturing it in surveys, but paying attention to the sentiment of the users is super important because that drives adoption, that drives compliance, all of the great things. So I think it's often maybe like you said, it's a softer thing. Yeah, how do they feel about it? Oh, okay. But it's actually really important. And is there is that a shift that you've seen recently in terms of paying more attention to the soft stuff in terms of software use and adoption and all of those things? And where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, so part of it comes down to way back when you're selecting a system, to use. And you can do the tangibles, throughputs. This is how much is going to cost. This is how much is going to cost to connect to the systems. This is the implementation. This is the user fees, whatever structure it is, right?
Yep.
The intangibles are employee satisfaction and time, and to try to put time on there. So it may be worthwhile if someone's considering changing systems or implementing new systems to say, survey, how long does it take you to route your documents? How long does it take you to review? How long do you want to do that? And then once the new system is in, you measure it again. So you have a pre and post to be able to say,
Hmm.
hey, it's taking me now 3 minutes instead of 10 minutes.
Hmm.
But um, if there's enough people that are upset at the current process, they'll be vocal enough to say, this is taking way too long.
Hmm.
And the more we get into tech, we can't survive without tech these days, right? It's in everything that we do. And you're going and surfing on a website and you're like, wow, I don't like how this is laid out. And you're like, I don't know that I'm going to shop here because their web design is not so good.
So
Or
true. Hmm.
I mean, and so it's applicable at work too, right? And it then turns into less output, right? Or
Yep.
less, for some companies, less revenue because it's a shopping website or whatever you want to do, right? And like, how easy is it to like do grocery shopping now online? We do Amazon at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? I mean, like it just like click, 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 like the one button buy button is like the most
Hmm.
dangerous button possible with Amazon,
Hmm.
but
Yep.
it's Vidori's in a way the same way. It's like you've made it so easy to be able to do this that people will want to go into the system and check stuff
Hmm.
because it's not like a roll your eyes being like, "Oh, I have to go and do content review." Right? It's more like, yeah, hey, I can do this done. This is like an easy task to get done. It changes the whole paradigm. It changes that satisfaction. And sometimes doing content review surveys to gauge that satisfaction with the help of, survey gurus to ask the right questions and things like that definitely is strongly recommended. And it'll totally hit your usability
Yeah.
metrics.
It's so funny because to your point on Amazon, it's like we have these expectations in our day-to-day life. Why don't we have those expectations in our work day-to-day life? And I think that's changing, but obviously the business world is coming along at a different pace, but it's just like an interesting dichotomy of like I have these expectations in my real life and yet I'm okay to slog through it at work. It's just like an interesting balance that we all sort of deal with. So it's just
Yeah. And,
you
and
know.
and a lot of us work to live, right? We don't live to work.
Hmm.
And so if we work to live, then we see life with all of these super easy things, and we're like, yeah, I'm slogging through it at work, and like, yeah, no, mm-mm.
Yep. Yep. Let's talk metrics a little bit more. So you've mentioned things like, time in the system, the amount of time that someone is spending on content review. What are the other metrics that you think have a strong correlation or connection back to the system is easy to use?
Um, Gosh, that's a little tough.
Okay.
Um, easy to use, I would say, would be the revisions, right?
Okay.
Some of the
Sure.
comments and the feedback. Um, Again, taking into account that you've done the appropriate training for people to understand. But if it's easy to use, and then time, if it's easy to use, people want to go in there and approve stuff, which means that things are going to get through a lot faster.
Hmm.
Right? As opposed to, man, I'm just dragging on this, and this is like Friday afternoon doing this with a beer in my hand or something, right? They're like, no, I'm engaged. I can do this on a Wednesday morning. I've got a half an hour, like boom, 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 done. And that right there, that takes 2 days off your review time, or off
Right.
submission time, or whatever, right? And so I would say the revisions, um, and then submission time, or
Hmm.
duration of the job.
But to your point, it's a component of, but maybe not a direct. And so I understand your point around it being difficult because there are so many factors that go into both of those things. So that's why it's kind of hard to prove,
Yeah.
right? Because it is one of the factors, but it's harder to prove because of A or A because of B type thing. So that makes total sense. Okay, so what would you say to someone, or what would be like your parting word or parting thought about usability? Why should people care about this? Why is this important? Why should this be maybe at more of the forefront of the criteria in terms of system selection, whether that's a compliance platform or really any other type of system in use?
Any So what I learned in all of this journey of implementing software is that somebody somewhere thought about what's called the user experience, or the user journey. And when you're bringing in a system into an organization, even though the software company has thought about that, you need to put it into context for your organization, right? Because they're building it going, yeah, it's super easy, point, click, drag, drop, highlight, whatever you want to do, strike through, delete, hit the submit button and it's gone. But every organization is unique, depending on where their employees are, what geographies you're in, if it's more pharma versus med device, and other nuances that they have to think about. So when you're evaluating a system, how does that user journey, what else, what are the 2 or 3 other things that you need to add in? I worked for a company that was internationally based, and so words mattered,
Hmm.
because we would take things with different meaning depending on the geography we were in, right? And so as we did things, we're like, well, this means this. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Well, yes, it does. And sure enough, as we kind of dove into things, you could see their perspective. And so my parting words would be, the companies that have built the software, Vidori included, have gone through a user journey or a customer journey. What's that extra thing that you need at your organization that focuses it on usability so that your adoption rate will go through the roof?
Hmm. Hmm. Super important and a great way to end the conversation for today. What a fun one today to talk
Um,
about usability. I'm sure this isn't the last time you and I will talk about usability in some way, shape, or form. But as always, Anne, thank you so much for coming on. Just really enjoy getting your perspective on this topic.
no, anytime.
And folks, the conversation doesn't stop here. Follow Vidori on LinkedIn for updates on new episodes. Ask us questions. We would love to get your feedback on any of the Amend and Progress episodes to date. Subscribe to Amend and Progress on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review the show. Until next time, this is Annalise signing off for Amend and Progress. Have a fantastic day.